Welcome back to Count Me In. I'm your host, Adam Larson, and today we're thrilled to have Callum Liang, author of Boardroom Blueprint, with us. In this episode, we'll delve into how accountants and business professionals can transform their careers by joining boards. Callum explains why being on a board is more than a career boost, it's a path to personal and professional growth. We'll cover what makes a great board member, the importance of building a strong LinkedIn profile, and practical networking tips to secure your first board seat. So, whether you're aspiring to elevate your career or curious about board dynamics, this episode is packed with actionable insights. Let's dive in. Well, Colin, we're so excited to have you on the Count Me In podcast today. And you're the author of a great book called The Boardroom Blueprint. And I thought it'd be great for us to kind of start out. Why is it so important for accountants and in business professionals to get on a board, to get on that first board, especially in the book, it encourages you, hey, you can get on that first board in like 60 days. And so why is it so important for us to get on those boards and to advance our profession?
Yeah, look, I think it's for a lot of people, anyone with kind of any ambition, they sort of have this plan to get on a board, but there's not actually much information out there. And I think what ends up happening is a lot of people kind of think, well, if I just put my head down and do good work for the next 20 years, someone will tap me on the shoulder and offer me a board seat. And so really the purpose of the book was, it came out of the fact that I'm an entrepreneur. I do small business mergers and acquisitions, and I was sitting on a lot of boards and realized that there was a lot of people on boards that probably shouldn't be on boards, and there was a lot of people being overlooked because they didn't have the right contacts, they didn't go to the right schools, they didn't look a certain way, and yet they were hugely talented and could add real value on the boards. And so I think I wrote the book and came up with the program, Veblen Director Program, to help businesses by getting good people onto boards to help those businesses to grow. But I think from an individual perspective, it's very easy in our careers to just get pigeonholed as just the accountant in the corner, or the marketing person or whatever. And the minute you get seen as someone that's sitting on the board of a company, it kind of changes everyone's perspective of you. You're now an accountant, but you're also a board member, and therefore someone clearly sees a value in you that your own business, maybe your own company, doesn't. And so I think it's a very useful tool, A, for how people perceive you, but B, just in terms of your own personal growth and journey. It's oftentimes when we start our career, we want to be the best within what we do. So we become very knowledgeable about all the accounting treatments, and we kind of learn as much as we can about our topic of expertise. But the danger with that is often you become very siloed. And so you become very good at what you know, but you become, it's quite difficult sometimes, especially in big companies, it's quite difficult to understand the whole ecosystem of the business. And the example I give in the book, I think, was that I started off my life as a tech engineer in the kind of the early days of the internet. Mm-hmm. And I was very good at, actually, I wasn't that good. I was okay. I was good enough at the tech of what happens in the back end of internet companies. But I had no understanding of what the business was. I really didn't, I knew clients paid for stuff, and but I didn't really understand the business. And obviously, if you're in a small business, then you do kind of have a little bit more visibility. In a big business, not so much. And when you go and sit on a board of a company, you have to think strategically and you have to think holistically, because that's your job on a board. And so I think from a personal growth perspective, it's a hugely valuable thing to aspire to.
That's really huge. So if I'm hearing you right, being on a board really kind of stretches you and moves you beyond what you're from your day-to-day thing. And so we were always talking about how important it is for the accounting team, for anybody in an organization, especially for the accounting team, to be at the table, at the strategy table, being that business partner. And so do you think that being on that board kind of helps stretch your mind and stretch your abilities to say, hey, I can be a part of that strategy, and it's because I'm on this board?
Yeah, look, I think it does. I think you become better at your job
Hmm.
the more you understand of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And so I think it's valuable in terms of just personal growth on that side of
Yeah.
things. It's valuable in terms of the contacts you make. Like once you get onto a board, you're typically associating with other board members, and they have interesting perspectives as well. So I think those things, and then like we said, sort of the way people perceive you and will probably give your opinions more credibility once you've
Hmm.
proven that another company can see value in having you on the board and playing a strategic role. So, yeah, I think it's hugely valuable, and I think I often say if I was to lose everything, the first thing I would try and do is do whatever it took to find my way onto the board of a company, because there's so many options that also come to you once you're on the board. You get so much visibility of things that you don't normally get sight of just as an employee.
Hmm. What are the qualities that you think companies are looking for in a good board member? So somebody's saying, hey, I want to do this. What are some of those qualities that maybe you don't have and somebody needs to upskill to get there?
So there's a big difference between the public perception of what a
Okay.
great board member is and what an actual great board member is. And
Yeah.
what we try and do in the Veblen Director Program and in the book, Boardroom Blueprint, is focus very much on the practicalities of your first board seat and
Mm.
where you can really add value there. So let me go with kind of the popular perception of what a good board member is, and then why that's not actually very useful. So if you think about, so a lot of people just assume that you can't even get a board seat unless you have some director's certificate, and there's
Mm.
companies out there that will charge a fortune to give you a certificate in a director's certificate. And these training companies, what they do is they take academic good corporate governance best practice
Mm.
that is kind of derived from an S&P 500 company, and they say this is what you need to learn, and it's very country specific. So it's kind of the laws of the country and the director's responsibility and all of this kind of good process stuff that would be perfect for an S&P 500 company. The problem is you're not going to start your board career at one of those big companies. You're
Yeah.
going to start in a small company. And if you try and apply best practice, good corporate governance to a small company, you'll kill it. Like that's not what they need. Um, and so I think there is this misperception, and equally the irony of it is that actually the S&P 500 companies, they don't need somebody with a certificate who understands the laws. Like those are the boards that are surrounded with lawyers. You
Hmm.
can't do anything without a lawyer and an advisor and the stock exchange having two people in the board telling you what you can and can't do. Like it's not really a useful if you're personally interested, great, go and get the certificate. But actually, if you think about where you're going to start the journey, which
Hmm.
is around small businesses, then what's far more useful to them is a little bit of your past experience that can help them make avoid making a mistake, or it's a connection that you can make, somebody in your network that could potentially be a great client to them or a
Mm.
potential investor. One introduction can completely transform the trajectory of a small business and
Yeah.
makes you incredibly valuable to them. And so really our whole kind of way of approaching things is not to focus on the top 1% of companies, but actually the rest. And if you look at, yeah, I personally believe that 99% of job adverts out there for board seats aren't real job ads. Like
Mm.
I don't, most boards that I've ever had a connection with, they don't hire people randomly from an internet ad, right? They hire people that they know, like, and trust, that have been recommended to them. And then maybe they have to put a job advert out because HR tells them to, or
Yeah.
more likely it's just a recruitment company on a fishing exercise for good CVs. Um, so there's that very small percentage of companies out there with boards anyway. And this is the other piece. Like, there's 330 million companies in the world.
Wow.
That's a lot of companies. Less than 1% of them have an active actual board
Mm.
meets regularly and is proactive. So you've got a huge number of companies that don't have boards, and yet every single successful company in the world has a board. So
Mm.
there's a big disconnect, and part of it is that entrepreneurs and small business owners assume that a board must be something for big companies, that it's very expensive and it's very difficult to pull together a good board. And actually, kind of our process is, it doesn't need to be a big, formal, expensive thing. In fact, a small business can set up an advisory board completely for free.
Mm.
And often, as I talk about in the book, almost all of my businesses, the first thing I do is I set up an advisory board before I've had my first customer or got my first employee. And it doesn't cost me anything. There's a lot of people out there that want to get that board experience and can do so by becoming an advisor on a small board. And that's a great way for an individual, especially if you're an accountant, and entrepreneurs are notoriously bad with numbers. So having an accountant as an advisor that can just kind of be a sounding board on a couple of things, is a great it's a great way to get on that first rung of the ladder, and then sort of leverage that up to bigger and better things.
I'd love to dig in a little bit more about why did you feel it's so important to have that advisory board before you hadn't had that first customer? What was the value in that, and why is that so important?
Yeah, so it came about. I've been an entrepreneur for a long time, and I was a young, not very good entrepreneur for a long time. And so it's a very lonely job being an entrepreneur, and
Hmm.
you get very stuck in the weeds of your own business, trying to figure everything out yourself. And so I started building advisory boards. I didn't know they were called advisory boards. Basically, at the time, I was just taking more experienced, more successful people out for lunch and trying to learn as much as I could from them.
Hmm.
Um, Occasionally trying to get them drunk and learn their secrets as well. And so that sort of almost morphed into a very informal advisory board. And I realized that it was a great shortcut to
Yeah.
growing the business. And it also gave me credibility when it came to finding clients, when it came to finding staff, because otherwise I was just a solopreneur with big ideas. But now
Hmm.
I was being advised by somebody that worked for this company and somebody that worked for this company. And suddenly I was able to trade off the credibility that they had, to help me grow my business. So I think for small businesses, and the reason that, again, people kind of get caught up into thinking that this is something that they'll do when they're much bigger. But if I'm starting a business, the first thing I do is I start to pull together advisors in that space or in different spaces,
Yeah.
because they can save me so much time. It's uh, like I said, one piece of advice they can give me can save me going down a rabbit hole in the wrong direction for a year or so. So
Mm.
um, it's incredibly valuable, and it's amazing. I think how easy it is to get people. And I always sort of focus on this, keep it very informal. Like,
Hmm.
if I was asking you to be an advisor on my company, I would say, look, Adam, this is going to take maximum of an hour a month. It's going to be a virtual coffee once a month.
Yeah.
I'd love to kind of get your feedback on where I'm going in the business, and for you to become an advocate. If you do a good job in that 1 hour, and I start saying, "Well, Adam, perhaps you could help me in this area, or perhaps you could come and talk to my team," or
Mm.
that's kind of going out of scope. And at that point, you can say, "Well, look, I'm more than happy to do an hour a month, but if you want to hire me for half a day to come in and train your team, that's a different piece." And so there's ways that you can start to monetize it, even if your first advisory board is completely voluntary. There's lots of options to monetize it, but it works really well. I think it works for individuals to get that first board experience, and it works for small businesses to have the value that and anyone that comes from a different environment is going to have a different way of looking at things, is going to have learned some trade secrets that can be very useful. So we've all got value that we can add. We've all got unique perspectives and ways of looking at things that could be very helpful for a small business owner that's doing one of the hardest jobs in the world.
Yeah, it is one of the hardest jobs. And one of the stats you mentioned is like less than 1% of the 355 million companies or businesses out there have an active board. How do you go from inactive to active? I've been on boards where I was like, "Oh, I'll join that little committee." And then you join that committee and you realize only one or two of you of the 10 people are working or actually doing the work. And you're like, "Wait, what?" And after a while, you start to lose your ambition because you're like, "I don't want to do everything. I'm not getting paid for this," or especially if it's a volunteer position. How do you transition from inactive to active?
So I think a lot of it comes down to, and one of the things we talk about is we don't want you to be a bad board member. There's enough bad board members out there already. So let's not add to that. We want you to be a good board member. And so a lot of it is focusing on really where you can add the most value. And
Yeah.
again, part of that is understanding that at different levels, companies need different things from their board members. And so oftentimes, and look, it's done with a lot of kind of goodwill, but oftentimes people, if they come from a big company background, they will try and apply what they've learned in a big company and apply it to a small business. And
Yeah.
that can be very unhelpful. So you kind of want to have that awareness of where you can add the most value. But that's really the focus. And I think adding focus on where you can add value, make sure, and like I said, I mean, that might have nothing to do with your career. That might just be somebody in your network that could make a difference. It might just be being an advocate for that company, talking about it, not sharing on social media that you've joined the board. It's a great company. Let me know if anyone would like to be connected. That can help a small business a lot. And then look, if you find yourself, so we in the book and in the program, I kind of talk through 5 steps, and the last step is leverage. And it's basically saying, okay, now that you've got this board seat, even if it's an advisory position, your job is to leverage that. Now, maybe your form of leverage is to help that company grow from being a small 2 or 3 person company to a 20 or 30 or 100 person company, and that would be great. But if it's not going anywhere, and you've kind of given it a good shot, but other board members aren't performing and you're not really getting any value out of it, your job is to leverage that and then jump onto another board and say, "Hey, look, I was on this board. I did this, this, and this for them. I'm looking to expand my board experience." And so you do another one. The 5, just out of interest. So the first one is really focus on connections. Like if you're genuinely looking to do this, you need to be very proactive in your connections. Most of us leave it fairly organically who we end up connected to. But if you want to get ahead in this space, you need to start connecting to entrepreneurs. You need to start connecting to directors, and investors become a very valuable resource. The next one is around knowledge, and you don't need to kind of become a master or an expert in corporate governance and ESG and diversity and all these things, but you need to have an awareness of them. You need to understand the difference between shareholder value and stakeholder value, and kind of understand what investors are looking for, which might be different from what the executives in the business are looking for. So you need to have a sort of a general knowledge of business beyond your core competence. And then the third one is starting to build your profile. And again, often employees have not done a lot around their personal profile. It's you kind of build your personal profile within the business, but not externally. And yet the world's changing, and you are who LinkedIn says you are. And so if someone's going to refer you as a potential board member, the first thing that board is going to do, or that business owner is going to do, is Google you. And the first thing that's going to come up is your LinkedIn profile. And
Yeah.
if you haven't updated it for 2 years, they're going to move on to the next person. So you need to be up to date. You need to be posting occasionally about things that are related to boards. And so it just shows that you are aware and in that space. And those first three things are all about how you get onto boards. So that's sort of that getting that first board seat. And the profile piece is really about sort of, if the average person knows 200 people, the chances of one of those 200 having a great career opportunity for you is fairly low. If 20,000 people know you, the chances of one of those 20,000 having a great career opportunity for you is pretty high.
Yeah.
It's just law of big numbers. And then once you've got that board seat, then it's around how you create value. So being aware of the value that the company needs and not being caught up on this, well, I need to tell them about corporate best practice. Entrepreneurs don't need that. And actually, I think a really relevant point is no business owner actually wants a board member. What they want is the results that the board member can bring. And that's really the understanding that value piece. And then the fifth one is that leverage and how you leverage it for yourself to take the company to the next level, or take yourself to the next level. And once you're on the bottom of the rung, once you're on that, get that first board seat, it's so much easier to then continue to move up, because otherwise it's like going back to the beginning of your career where you can't get a board seat because you don't have board experience. And how do you get a board experience? Like it's that same level of frustration that you felt right at the beginning of your career when looking for work experience.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And I want to focus a little bit on that beginning, that first step, that networking. Because a lot of times, what I've read about boards is sometimes you have to get a recommendation from a current board member to get on that board.
Yeah.
And so you're like, what if you're somebody, you're just saying, hey, I don't know anybody who's on a board. How do I find these positions? How do I get out there? Because, that first step is a huge one, getting to that first board. And maybe we can talk a little bit about, finding that first board position.
Yeah. So actually, we have a mantra at Veblen, which I talk about in the book as well, which is don't apply for a board seat, create a board seat. So if you can just go back to numbers, which is good for accountants, like just law of big numbers is, if only 1% of companies have a board, it's going to be much easier to create a board for a company that doesn't have a board than it is to actually join a board. And the interesting thing is, and this is a nice little kind of hack in this game, is that if you approach a small business owner and say, hey, look, you've got a great looking business. Would you be interested in me finding 4 or 5 really talented people to create an advisory board for you for a year? It's not going to cost you anything. They'll get their experience, and you'll get free consultation for an hour or so a month. Just really low key, very informal. Most business owners would be very open to that. The interesting thing is what you're saying is that you're going to go and find those people. So you go out to a few people in your network, you say, would you be interested in this? Most people are very excited about that opportunity to get their first board experience.
Of course.
By default, you're on that board. Now, what happens is you might sort of present 4 or 5 people to the business owner and say, hey, look, I've spoken to these people, that they would be interested. What do you think? And they go, well, I like this one. I like that one. I'm not so sure on that one. And you go, okay, no problem. But nobody ever looks at you, because you're the person putting all this to get together. So by default, you're sort of on the board. So
Yeah.
it's a great way of doing it. And also, but like, those people that you just brought onto the board now owe you a big favor. So it's a great
That's
way.
true.
And this entire game runs on favors and who knows who and who's done what favor for the others. So getting in there uh, at the beginning is a good way of doing it.
Hmm. It sounds like it's very important to have an active network of people, whether you're using LinkedIn or something else. A lot of, obviously, like you said, when somebody Googles you, the first thing they'll see is LinkedIn, especially when they're looking at you professionally. How important it is it to, you know, interact with your network on LinkedIn? Because a lot of times we connect with people and then we forget about it.
Yeah.
What are there different ways that we can connect with those people and try to make those connections? Especially you're saying, hey, approach that person with a small business. A lot of times you might not connect with that person except through LinkedIn.
Yeah. So look, I think there's for a lot of people, networking kind of feels odd. Like unless you're sort of in
Yeah.
sales or marketing, where it's kind of that's the game. If you're an accountant, it might feel a little bit odd to do this. But I'd say there's a couple of things. First of all, you want to start being deliberate about it. And then the
Yeah.
second thing is that you actually already have an interesting network. You probably just you're not aware of it. You're not aware how to package it. But there will be people that that could be very valuable to another company out there. So don't kind of discount the network that you already have, even if you've never sort of deliberately built a network, but they can be very valuable to someone who doesn't know them.
Mm.
And then LinkedIn makes this much easier. Like
Yeah.
you no longer need to go to those horrible networking events and drink cheap wine and eat horrible food and pretend to be interested in everyone. Like you can pretend to be interested in people on LinkedIn instead and drink whatever you like. But the way to do it is not to kind of go out and aggressively try and sort of make connection requests and stuff, because actually often the people that you want to connect with, lots of people are trying to connect with them and it's difficult. The really valuable thing that is sort of overlooked in LinkedIn is if you find interesting people that you'd like to be connected to, directors on boards, entrepreneurs, small business owners, a lot of them are trying to build their own profile. And the way that they're doing that is they're
Mm.
making posts on LinkedIn.
Okay.
The most neglected part of LinkedIn is going and making comments on people's posts. It's a great way to build a relationship. Now, everyone who posts wants people to comment because that's how they get validation of their ideas, and it's how relationships start. It's a very easy way to start a relationship with someone. And if you're the person that kind of jumps in the comments, says, "Hey, this is a really good idea. Have you thought about this?" Or, "By the way, have you seen this article?" Or, "I connect you to this person." Suddenly, you become a valuable resource, and they all
Mm.
want to connect to you. And so I think that's good. And then if you start looking at this profile piece, and I know um, it kind of if you've never published in or posted, it kind of feels really weird. And
Hmm.
yeah, who am I to do it? Everyone else is an expert, and then there's everybody else that's kind of talking about how wonderful they are, and I don't want to be that person. So there's a couple of ways of thinking about it. First of all, is building profile is not about shining a spotlight on yourself. Go onto Instagram if you want to do that, but I don't think there's many accountants on Instagram. The best way to do it is to shine a light on the people you're helping. So
Mm.
shine a light on your clients, shine a light on somebody in your team that's doing cool things. Like put the light on somebody else, but by shining the light on somebody else, you kind of get reflected in that, and it's easier than none of us want to go out and say, "Hey, look, I'm a wonderful accountant." Like that. It feels odd to do that, and you're the least credible person to say that. So
Yeah.
don't even try that. But the other thing is well, in terms of posting and adding real value to your network, like a lot of us again will sort of say, "Well, I who am I to sort of be an expert and talk about like what's happening in the accounting world?" if you think about your audience, not as the people that you look up to, but as the people that are just entering your industry, if you post for the person you were 5 years ago, what would you have liked to have learned? And that's a really easy way of doing it, because you're not trying to impress everyone. You're just trying to say, hey, look, if you're coming into the accounting world, these are 3 things I wish I'd known at the beginning. That's really, really valuable. The other way of doing it is never, I don't like the idea of positioning myself as an expert. I try not to. I always kind of say, look, this is something that I'm learning with you. So if you do that sort of, this is a voyage I'm on. So, hey, over the next few years, I want to sit on some boards. So in this process, I'm going to share what I'm learning along the way. Oh, I've just discovered that there's a great book by Callum Liang called Boardroom Blueprint. But in that, I discovered this. But if you're sharing stuff as you learn it along the way, and you're not doing it from the position of I'm an authority on this, you're doing it from the position of, hey, I found this interesting, you might too. Mm-hmm. That's actually much more authentic and much easier for people to get behind. And then again, when you do get referred to a board and they look at your postings, it all kind of aligns and it makes sense and it comes across authentic. And so that would be sort of my advice on how to do it.
Well, Callum, I think this has been a great conversation. I encourage everybody to check out the link to the Boardroom Blueprint book in the show notes. Connect with Callum on LinkedIn, and let's keep the conversation going. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Pleasure. It's been fun.
This has been Count Me In, IMA's podcast, providing you with the latest perspectives of thought leaders from the accounting and finance profession. If you like what you heard and you'd like to be counted in for more relevant accounting and finance education, visit IMA's website at www.imanet.org.